It is another edition of a Road to Recovery series with our friends from the Orthopedic and Spine Centers of Wisconsin. I'm Alex Strofe, joined today by Dr. Dayton Opel from the Orthopedic and Spine Centers of Wisconsin. Dr. Opel, thanks for doing this.
Alex, thanks for having me. Great to be here.
So we're going to talk hand injuries today. Obviously, you're Badger educated and a Badger fan. I am not Badger educated, but I am a Badger fan. And we saw the tough injury to quarterback Tanner Mordecai. Broken hand in the game, had surgery Sunday, had a rod placed in it, and timetable TBD. And I always lead these with, I don't want you to diagnose somebody you haven't seen, obviously, but it is an interesting injury. Obviously, if you're a quarterback who needs to throw the football, your hand a little bit important. So can you walk us through maybe what you saw there as a Badger fan?
Yep. Exactly. That was a tough one. And, I think all the Badger fans across the state kind of breathed a collective sigh of despair when we saw that play, when we saw his hand come down on the helmet, and him mouthing to the coach, I can't throw, and then hearing that the next day he received the surgery to place a pin in a fractured bone of his hand. So thanks for having me on. As an orthopedic surgeon and as a hand surgeon, this is, of course, what I do and all that I do. Hand injuries are extremely common in the NFL, in collegiate sports, in all levels of football. They become more common during the fall, during this time of the year, during Friday Night Lights and Saturday and Sundays. And we have a lot of great studies, a lot of great literature evaluating not just the fractures that happen in athletes, but very specifically football players and the injuries that they get, including collegiate and NFL players, and timetables for when they get back to throwing and playing. So overall, what we know is that he has a fracture of his hand. Luke Fickle said he had surgery to place a pin. What we know about injuries of the hand are, including when they involve a fracture, which means one of the bones of the hand. I got a couple props here.
Oh, look at this.
One of the bones of the hand has actually gotten fractured. So I have this hand model here that gives a representation of the 27 bones of the hand. And of course, you see the bones of the phalanges. These are the fingers, these set of 3 bones in each of the fingers. The bones that form the back of the hand are called metacarpal bones. And the metacarpal bones end up being by far and away the most commonly injured and fractured bone in the hand, including in the population of football players. Some of the other bones that kind of form the wrist joint, those bones, whereas they can also be fractured, those bones are more stout, they're denser, they're covered with a lot more soft tissue, a lot more protection. So they are far less commonly injured and commonly fractured than, for example, a metacarpal, which is a long, skinny bone, one of the bones that kind of can form the back of your hand. And we know that there's good literature, good studies out there, even from 20, 30 years ago, looking at all the hand injuries in the NFL, showing that if you have a hand injury, it's most likely to be a metacarpal fracture that you've sustained playing football. And that a metacarpal fracture, which is the breaking of that metacarpal bone, is 5 times more common than any other injury sustained for the average football player. And that's the nature of the biomechanics of these bones. Are long, they're skinny, and when the whole hand is coming down with a lot of force on a helmet, you can imagine part of the finger and part of that bone wants to go one way and the other part of the hand goes the other way, and you end up with a crack. So when we talk about injuries and metacarpal fractures or other fractures of the hand, the question then becomes, does it need surgery? And if so, what factors are we talking about for the timetable that we want to get this player back on the turf as soon as we can? So we already know that Tanner Mordecai underwent surgery to place a pin. And what that can mean, what the goals of surgery can be with any fracture are multiple fold. One, if the bone itself is broken and in the wrong position, well, we have to get that bone back where it needs to be so that it has a chance to heal, as opposed to if it's too far away, the two bone ends are too far away, they're not going to have a chance to heal. So one goal of surgery is if the bones are too far apart, we got to get them closer together. The other component of surgery, or the other goal of surgery, is we want to stabilize the fracture. Now, it might be that it's an unstable fracture and those bones are completely in different area codes, and they need to get put back where they belong and then stabilize there with some hardware or some metal or a pin or metal plates and screws or a rod that goes on the inside portion of that bone. Several factors come into play when deciding what type of stabilization you need. The other thing about fractures of the hand, we have a great series from this year that was just published out of Baylor, looking at all metacarpal fractures that happened in the NFL over a 6-year period. And they looked at more than 200 of these fractures. And they found that only about 40% of these fractures ended up receiving surgery. And what that means is that less than half of them are at the point where the bones have thus been moved to the point where they need to get put back, or they're so unstable that they need a surgery to implant metal to then stabilize it in an effort to get the player back onto the field sooner rather than later. So we know that in some of these fractures that where maybe the bone isn't moved or it's just a small crack, which end up being more than half of them, those players, those patients don't need surgery and they are able to get back playing. The same series that looked at these more than 200 fractures in the NFL also found that the 40% of players who did need surgery for metacarpal fractures were able to get back at around 2 weeks, whether you got surgery or whether you didn't get surgery.
Wow, that's super interesting. So clearly, Dr. Opel, you've watched these before because you just answered like 4 of my questions right there in a row. You brought the props, all great stuff. You kept using the word common. I think complicated when you bring up 27 bones in the hand, right? Because obviously these can vary, and you just went on a great line about the surgical versus non-surgical options. Is it common though to use that word to break multiple of the bones at the same time? Because when you're thinking of force, I would think, oh man, this could be several of the bones.
You're exactly right. Whereas we see it frequently, it's actually less common to have multiple bones broken,
Really?
including multiple of the metacarpal fracture bones. Even though certainly if the trauma is severe enough, then the force doesn't stop after one bone gets broken. Oftentimes 2 or 3 can get broken, and that's an indicator of a higher amount of trauma and energy that goes through the soft tissues and through the bones that can then break those. And Alex, on that point, what we know about these fractures is the risk of needing surgery and having a little bit longer return to play is longer if you do have multiple of these fractures.
Fantastic. So when you hear pin placed in, we assume just one. What does that tell you from your background and expertise in terms of timeline? And again, I don't want you to diagnose somebody you haven't seen, but hearing that, what does that mean to you?
Yep, there's a variety of ways that we can fix bones of the hand, including metacarpal fractures, or including bones of the fingers, which are called phalanx bones or phalanges. And one of the more common ways is using small metal pins that have enough strength to be inserted into the bone ends to hold the bone ends and the bones in place so that the bones can thus heal in the correct position. And sometimes when we fix fractures using these pins, it gives us the advantage of being able to not make an incision to do that surgery, get the bones lined up, place a pin or multiple pins across the fracture, and enable the pins to hold the fracture in place while it heals. The tough thing about that is oftentimes these small metal pins, which are about the caliber of paper clips, are flexible, and they're not the strongest material in the world. And so even though they can hold the bones in place where the bones need to be, those often require additional protection and additional time to watch and to protect these fractures while they're healing. And these pins oftentimes don't reintroduce the necessary amount of stability to enable that bone to get right back into the action, or that hand to get right back into being able to grip a football and throw it with full force. The other options that we commonly employ to fix fractures of the hands, especially when there are goals of getting the player back to the field as quickly as possible while also still safely protecting the fracture so that it heals correctly and in the correct position, such that we ensure that the hand is totally normal, for the rest of that student athlete's life. But very frequently, the goal is to get that player the treatment that they need, but then back on the field. And so and a lot of times the positions, the player's position, whether it's a defender, cornerback, or a skill position like a quarterback, what they're doing with their hands makes a big difference on what we can do for them to get them right back on the field. And very commonly, whatever we're doing, if it's a defensive player who doesn't need much manual dexterity with the hand, we put them right into a cast and we get them right onto the field and they're playing for the next game. It's a little bit trickier when it's somebody that's in a receiving position or a skill position like a wide receiver or a quarterback who has more sensitive use of their hand, or where we're a little bit more cautious and we can't, for example, use a big protective club cast. And sometimes we have to use less secure splint devices to give additional protection to those players in an effort to get them back sooner. So it's going to be very interesting over these next few days, over this weekend, the next week, to hear what Coach Fickle and the coaching staff and what Tanner and what they're all deciding in terms of when are they going to get him back on the field with this specific injury, with the specific treatment that he has, considering the time to healing, how stable the fracture is now, how risky the team would like to be in getting him back sooner at the risk of potentially putting a newly repaired fracture that's maybe a little bit too soon to get ready to full action, back to play. Regardless, a lot of these fractures we see healed in the 6 to 8 week time frame with or without surgery. So it wouldn't be unreasonable to expect some news regarding if he's going to be back playing before the end of the season, kind of along that 6 week time frame. Maybe will he sit the season out, but then try to get him ready to go for the Big Ten championship game. That's maybe being a little bit optimistic on a couple fronts, or a bowl game. So that I think we're going to be finding out some more of the details over the next week or two.
I learned so much just talking to you for 12 minutes, Dr. Dayton Opal. At orthospinecenters.com is the website to learn more. If you or somebody you love has a hand injury, there's one guy to make it make sense and get you back to health. Appreciate you doing this, Dr. Opal. This was terrific.
Awesome. Thanks, Alex. Great to be on here. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. Another edition of the Road to Recovery series with our friends from the Orthopedic and Spine Centers of Wisconsin.